that you do when you encounter a woman, an ethnic minority, or an LGBT person who disagrees with you. You talk down to them, you treat them like they're traitors to a cause that they never even supported to begin with. Lefty Pol even has a term they use for working class people who disagree with them, which is class cuck. You communists are guilty of the same unforgivable sin that the evil capitalists are supposedly guilty of, exploiting the working class. You demagogue to them, persecute the ones that don't fall in line with your beliefs, get them to fight and die for your revolution, only to create a power vacuum that was planned from the start to be filled by a socialist ruling class. Cut the moral faggotry. We are onto you.
Now, if you maintain control over the means of production, you can do all sorts of profitable stuff with it, and the stuff it makes. You can jack up prices so that people have to pay absurd amounts of money for things that they need to live. You can throw away half of your perfectly functional inventory into a landfill to create artificial scarcity.
Market competition between EpiPen manufacturers should result in increased supply and drive prices down. However, competing with its main manufacturer, Mylan, is literally illegal. You can't even import them from out of the country, thanks to patent laws and idea monopolization, giving Mylan a monopoly. As for Amazon, they receive millions in tax incentives every year. Though strictly speaking, tax incentives aren't direct government subsidies, it's still a tremendous competitive advantage in terms of averting the ordinary costs of doing business, all the while having a special deal with the government-run United States Postal Service to ship their goods at reduced rates, allowing Amazon to save $1.47 with every package over their competitors.
Why is it that whenever Slimy brings up valid points, it's always to complain about things that would be exacerbated by the very policies he supports? For example, he hates competition in the free market, and competition is the very means by which monopolies are broken up, or in the very least, kept in check. But then again, if he were consistent in his beliefs, he wouldn't be a socialist.
You can manufacture your products to deliberately become obsolete so that people have to buy them again.
Speaking as someone who has done a lot of computer science and information tech related stuff, if anyone brings up planned obsolescence, I know I'm dealing with one of three kinds of people. Either those who have never heard of Moore's Law, those who are retarded enough to buy Apple devices, or ungrateful twats who don't realize that not everyone can afford to buy a cutting-edge supercomputer. Me personally, I don't ever use Apple devices. I use Windows and Linux. I don't update my hardware unless I absolutely have to, and I know what sort of devices can be physically upgraded, so I don't have to buy an entirely new system every couple of years. Having the most expensive advanced smartphone is not a high priority for me. I don't even play games on my smartphone unless it's an old console game on an emulator. Why do you blame the companies you buy from and not your own lack of judgment when buying electronic devices?
Apple is low-tier normie trash anyways.
Hell, if you have enough of a product, you don't even need to sell it. You can just speculate on it and drive the price to such insane highs that simply owning it and letting it rot, deliberately keeping people from using it, makes you rich. Somehow. It's all very normal and sensible.
Surprisingly, I have to give Fortune Slime credit for actually citing examples in the previous things he's mentioned, but here he mentions absolutely jack shit. What the hell is he talking about? Investing in other companies? So that they succeed, you also succeed? Is he talking about cryptocurrency? I'm honestly baffled.
What he's talking about is speculation. But what is speculation? It's purchasing a commodity to resell it at a higher price later. Now, speculation carries a bad rap. You'll often hear the media deriding speculators making vast profits off of people's suffering. Yet speculation is not only not a bad, but beneficial to society. Firstly, we can prove it isn't a bad because where's the harm? All that a speculator is doing is engaging in two voluntary transactions. One, to buy the good at a price both parties benefit from at the time, and the second, to resell it later at a price both parties mutually agree to. If this weren't the case, then the transaction pairs would never happen. This is a perfectly legitimate action that requires no justification, but the benefit to society comes from how speculation affects supply and demand. The initial purchase signals to producers that there is demand for the product. Even if the effect is marginal, it still is cause for producers to increase supply and lessen the effect of the speculated shortage. Reselling the goods for a net profit during a shortage also helps drive down the price of goods through increasing supply while also providing much needed commodities. Is it more ethical that if someone stored up water bottles for an emergency, that they simply dump the water rather than sell it to thirsty people after a hurricane, meeting their need for water while also making money in return? To say nothing of how broad the definition of speculation truly is. Anyone who's bought a house, expecting to resell it later for a higher price, is engaged in speculation. If you bought anything from the stock market, you're engaged in speculation. If you bought shoes and expect to get more value from the shoes than the money you paid in, that's another form of speculation. Putting the initial capital investment into starting a business is a form of speculation. The truth is that we're speculating constantly, and it's the driver for innovation and technological advancement, because ultimately there is no guarantee that the initial investments will ever pay off. There's not only nothing wrong with speculation, but it's a damn good thing that we have it. All the attempt to limit speculation would accomplish is insert a coercive monopoly as a third party to arbitrarily restrict voluntary transactions between consenting adults. This is unethical. This is an economic bad, far worse than the problem Slimeball's attempting to solve.
Remember, when people talk about the rich and successful, they're the people you should relate to. Watch aspirational programming that teaches you how rich and successful people behave. Remember, consume the same things that they do. Vote like they do. Think like they do. Do as they say.
Nice straw man. So he interprets it as emulating the rich and successful in every way, down to their character flaws and the way they dress, instead of critically evaluating the advice actually given, which is to see what actually works for wealthy people and doing it, while sticking to the things that work for you personally, like wearing inexpensive clothing that looks good enough, or not watching shitty reality TV about some brainlet with huge tits. It's proof that he doesn't want to approach this issue in good faith. Instead of taking advice from people who are financially successful and even being selective in which pieces of advice to follow, he wants to wallow in his misery and blame all of his troubles onto others. Hey, certain rich people aren't the most likable people in the world, but to use them as an excuse to not take responsibility for your own well-being, and to blame them for your own lack of success, or even anything that goes wrong in the world, is just retarded.
Personally, I find the advice of the rich and successful more compelling. Unlike authoritarian communism, I'm free to ignore the rich and successful.
Don't think of yourself as poor. In fact, if it helps, try to imagine the poor as dirty and drug-riddled, kind of subhuman. People who are just trying to abuse the system and take your hard-earned money. That way, you won't feel bad about all of the horrible things you're gonna have to do to them.
Oh goody, another straw man. Aside from the fact that you don't represent the interests of the working class or the poor as much as you claim you do, what people are saying is that one should emulate the financially successful in what they do right, and avoid making the same mistakes as those who are not. Hell, my own scriptures teach that one should care for the poor and needy, even if they were stupid and brought their poverty upon themselves. But here's the difference between you and I. I believe people should care for each other out of the goodness of their hearts, while you hold the cynical belief that people should be forced at gunpoint to do so. That isn't real altruism at all, and it says a great deal more about your own lack of charity and compassion than it does your enemies. I almost feel sorry for you.
Charity is correlated with economic freedom. Plus, the whole subhuman thing comes out of the very authoritarianism Slimeball directly advocates for. I don't think you, dear viewers, need me to tell you this, but he's clearly projecting his own contempt for the rich and belief in their subhuman status onto the rich. I can speculate as to why, but sadly I don't have a crystal ball into his heart and mind. I have always wondered what happened in his life to fill his heart with such hatred.
Sounds easy, right? Well, it's trickier than it sounds. Because remember, other people are going to be envisioning their success too, which means that you have to envision that much harder. They might envision a better world, where everyone's basic needs are met, which means you have to envision that world being somehow worse for them, and make absolutely sure that your vision becomes the accepted one.
First of all, you still haven't gotten around to explaining how the economy is a zero-sum game, nor have you debunked the notion that life is getting better for everyone, even for those in the third world. Second of all, why should I consider other people's subjective opinions on how society should be run, instead of letting them take care of themselves and their own families, and asking them to extend to me the same courtesy? I, on the other hand, do not have to envision anything. I have real-world events and data to back me up. I have realistic goals for myself, and plans on what to fall back on if I don't fulfill those goals. Your vision for society is a pipe dream. It has never existed. It will never exist. And every single time commies have pursued that dream, it has ended in nothing but starvation and tyranny, even in anarchist Spain and Ukraine, to the point where corporate tyranny is preferable to it. Communism is a fucking religion. And if there is anything people like me hate, it's people who force this evil religion onto others. So you are damned right to believe that if you try to enforce your subjective opinions onto me and onto those I love, I will retaliate, and I will enjoy it far more than I should. This land is my land, this land ain't your land. I've got a shotgun, and you ain't got one. If you don't get off, I'll blow your head off. This land is private property. Damn, that ditty will never get old.
Economics is not a zero-sum game. Politics is.
Sometimes, though, envisioning things in your mind just isn't enough, and you have to start envisioning things with armies and weapons. Now let's say, hypothetically, some ingrateful country, let's call them Chile, tries to democratically elect a socialist leader. Don't worry, just envision a fascist coup.
Yeah, I know where you're going with this. But the funny thing is, you can't claim moral superiority in this case either. You commies constantly whine about how capitalists are imperialists who want to extract resources from weaker nations, and yet you have no moral or ethical basis upon which to cry foul. Communists have engaged in imperialism. Why shouldn't they? They don't believe in freedom of association, private property, or nationalism, so they cannot, on principle, oppose imperialism. When they do, it's just to virtue signal to those who genuinely believe that it's wrong to violently seize something that belongs to another society. I did an entire video on this, link in the description. The communists have done the same exact thing that NATO has done, which is to install puppet dictators and to impose their ideology onto entire countries outside of their borders. And it's likely they did it on an even more massive scale than NATO did. You have the Hungarian Revolution, which was brutally crushed by the Soviet Union. The Solidarity movement in Poland, which, although it was successful, was repressed by the Soviet Union. So no matter how you slice it, the people in Chile were screwed either way. Either they'll have to deal with Pinochet, or they'd have to deal with a regime that would abolish private property and thus erode all of their other freedoms by extension, as has happened to all the other socialist countries surrounding them, especially Venezuela. Venezuela, a country that you commies celebrated as an example of successful socialism up until everything went to shit. Then it was state capitalism. And here's the thing, In the case of Spain, South Korea, and Chile, as horrible as those dictatorships were, none of them could possibly hold a candle to the atrocities committed by the communists, nor did their regimes last as long as their communist counterparts. All three of those countries eventually became freer countries with relatively free markets and some passing semblance of political freedom, and in the latter two cases, became more prosperous than the countries around them. Fascism is like getting the flu. You could get seriously sick from it and die, but on the other hand, you could make a full recovery and become stronger as a result. Communism is like getting cancer. Every time you fall ill, you become weaker, and there's always the chance that the cancer will return and finish you off. So it really speaks volumes when you can't even claim moral superiority over a monster like Pinochet, doesn't it? You don't even care about human rights any more than he did. Cut the moral faggotry already.
At least Pinochet stepped down from power. Slimeball's only issue with Pinochet is that he wasn't on his team. If Pinochet were on his team, then we'd never hear hair nor hide from him. Like how communists don't want to talk about the atrocities committed by Trotsky, or Lenin, or Mao, or Stalin, or Pol Pot, or Mugabe, or Castro, or Che, or Mandela, or you know what, you get the point.
And before you complain about human rights or democracy, need I remind you that those things are symptomatic of a failure mentality that judges economies on how good they are for the people within them, and not how good they are for the tiny minority of rich mutants who actually matter?
Have you actually been able to produce a working example of your ideal society that actually is good for the majority and not for the small minority known as the socialist ruling class? By your refusal to provide a constructive alternative to the shit you whine about, you automatically lose the argument.
Interesting thing about Marxism. Thomas Sowell, the economist, was a Marxist when he was younger, part of a Marxist community agitation group. He did it because he actually wanted to help people. But he realized his ideas were not only not helping, but counterproductive. He brought this information to his supervisors, thinking that they also wanted to help too, but was told to essentially sit down and shut up. As it turns out, the idea put forward under Marxism are diametrically opposed to the well-being of anyone in society except for the rich elite, who get to become the dictators, as is the case with literally every Marxist revolution ever. Democracy necessarily centralizes power into the hands of a corrupt cabal of representatives, and it just devolves into vote-buying, corporatism, and corruption. You can't avoid authoritarianism by simply slapping the label of democratic on it. Seriously, do these people even know what democracy even means?
Envisioning fascism will get you out of a lot of jams as a capitalist. Like, say for example, your neoliberal reforms make everybody in your country poor. You can just blame it on the immigrants you accidentally made by making some other country poor.
Except the exact opposite has happened. It really says a lot when your ideology is so shitty that it makes subhuman fascists look good in comparison.
Totalitarian systems rely on external foes for continued existence, without the omnipresent threat of fascism to capture everyone's attention and frighten them into compliance. Stalinist Russia would have collapsed much sooner. It's called the hierarchy of needs. If the base of the pyramid is insecure, then people aren't going to be engaging in self-actualization, where they'll ask very inconvenient questions like, does the government really serve my interests? Or, why do I have to be executed for drinking coffee?
Fascism can't solve all your problems, though. There's no getting around it. Every business faces challenges.
Business is fascism. Business, producing products, goods, and services that people want to buy voluntarily, is fascism. Then again, in current year, everything is fascism.
Maybe you don't have a good place to dump your toxic waste. Maybe your products are wildly unsafe. Maybe you're releasing enough carbon into the atmosphere to end life on Earth.
slime ball speaking is releasing carbon into the atmosphere to supposedly end life on Earth. The difference is that Marxism actually would end life on Earth.
Whatever it may be, the small-minded public may not share your vision of profiting endlessly, consequences be damned.
Or people will autistically screech about the environment as if it's a good excuse to force their subjective opinions on how to run society onto other people. You can screech all you want about how scientists who disagree with you are somehow bought out by the Jewish bourgeoisie, but how are you going to explain the fact that socialism and other forms of collectivism are to blame for the worst environmental devastation this world has ever seen due to the tragedy of the commons?
For those who don't know, the tragedy of the commons is the phenomenon where resources owned in common are exploited to exhaustion. The common example is that of shepherds and their flocks of sheep. Since shepherds earn money from their sheep, they're incentivized to keep their sheep populations in check. If they don't, they'll eat all of the grass on the shepherd's land and they'll eventually starve to death. If there is a field all the shepherds own in common, then their incentive is to have their flocks become as large as possible, to eat as much of the grass as possible. If they don't, then one of the other shepherds will do it to them. The result will be that the commons will become exhausted rather than sustained. The flocks die, and eventually the shepherds die. Statism is the perfect example of the tragedy of the commons, because there is no ownership of government-owned properties. The state has no incentive to maintain the value of any of it, which is how you end up with horror shows like the Animus River, which became so polluted due to a botched government cleanup project, the river turned a sunny D shade of orange. Then there's Lake Karachay, which was used as a radioactive waste dumping ground by the Soviet Union for years. Nowadays, standing on the lakeshore for 1 minute will kill you from radiation poisoning. Let's not even get to the disaster of government central planning that was Chernobyl. Communism abolishes property rights and holds all goods and services in common. The tragedy of the commons is inevitable. Under Marxism, and note I'm differentiating between communism and Marxism, this problem is amplified. Not only do you have property in common, but you have a coercive monopoly on top of it. Here are the facts. There is no economic system that isn't going to be motivated by profit. Even communism is being proposed because there is a perceived benefit greater than the input required to achieve it. That's all profit is. Now, production will still need to occur. The difference is that under property rights, people have an incentive to maintain the value of their property and can be held liable for damaging others' property. Thus, they have an incentive to dispose of waste cleanly if they can't otherwise find a way to commercialize the waste. These incentives do not exist under systems of communal property. If you really care about the environment, then you need to look at which system incentivizes people to care at all. If you took off your blood-tinted ideological lenses and actually had an objective look as to what political or even economic system best serves the interest of workers and the environment, the only conclusion you could possibly reach is that Marxism is the worst idea you could ever come up with to achieve this.
Rest easy though, it'll never work. Until it does, so enjoy it while you can.
I will. Believe me, I will. Even if I never become a CEO of a company, even if I never become famous. Because you will still come after people like me after you're done murdering the various heads of state, and any rich person or business owner you can get your greasy, unwashed hands on. Communists always turn on those who are well off when shit hits the fan, dubbing them the petite bourgeoisie, because of their retarded belief that the economy is a zero-sum game, and that anyone who isn't suffering is to blame for the suffering of everyone around them. They'll even execute people for retarded reasons, because they were doing things like selling cigarettes and coffee, worshipping God, or making love to those of the same sex.
They call themselves champions of the working class, but in reality, they're little more than whiny little bitches, cosplaying as virtuous in order to exercise their murder boners. I don't know what happened in Slimeball's life that made him want to murder people he's never met, who have done him no wrong, but whatever it is, yeah, it's a direct threat to me, personally, since I worship a god that isn't the state, and I dare to disagree with authoritarian sociopaths. Also, one other thing, I don't take kindly to threats.
Even if you were to miraculously bring the working class to your side, the same working class that despises upper-class Antifa snowflakes like yourself, even if you realize your dreams of a communist revolution, the perfect excuse to take out your senseless anger and hatred upon those more successful than yourself, you sure as hell aren't going to enjoy it either. You never will. No communist ever has, except for the communist leaders who successfully manipulated and exploited the working class and got them to do their dirty work for them. Those that engage in secret combinations and create power vacuums that are always filled by a communist dictator, which is themselves. As sarcastic and as bitter as you are throughout this video, you have proven nothing to me except you want an excuse to be perpetually miserable, especially since you are incapable or unwilling to actually provide any constructive alternative to the very things you bitch and moan about. You hate those who are even a little bit more successful than you are, blaming them for anything bad that happens in this world, even things they personally had nothing to do with. All I can say to that is, have fun with that.
The only thing of value I gain from this is about how business is fascism. Alright, we're done here. Now, get me out of here. Postal, what are you doing? Sorry, I had something stuck in my throat.
Fair enough. You're free to go.
Yay. Also, next time you kidnap me, at least take me out to dinner first, or right afterwards. Anyways, bye!
In order to be truly successful, you have to have absurd fuck-off cash, which you're not going to get by being a cog in a machine. You gotta own the machine, or something which produces goods and services. That way, you don't have to produce anything.
This is too much cancer for me to take. Who's crazy enough to help me with this idiocy? Actually, I have just the guy, but he may not help voluntarily.
Marginal utility of roads is large enough that forcing people to pay for them at gunpoint is pointless. But don't take my word for it, just think about it for a moment. If you think roads are valuable, then what the hell? What? Hey, what's going on?
Why hello, heretic. Sorry for the violent kidnapping, but you refused to help me the first time I asked for your help with this guy, so I had to take drastic measures.
Huh. Well, I didn't know you were into this too. I mean, I'm flattered you feel this way about me, but I'm not, you know...
No. Actually, I don't. I just want you to help me respond to this video.
Ooh, I've been a very bad boy, haven't I? The safe word's Waffle House.
Okay, if that's the game you want to play, help me with this video, or I swear to God, I will destroy you as quickly and as painlessly as possible.
Waffle House?
Safe words don't cut it. Help me respond to this video.
Okay, fine. It's not like ContraPoints is making a part 3 anyways. Hit it!
Some people just have it. That wow factor. When they walk into a room, the whole place lights up. They're passionate, driven, goal-oriented, type A personalities. A higher class of human being. Bigger, stronger. The natural winners in our society. More competitive, more successful. Are they just born lucky? I don't think so.
A lot of those skills are teachable. The YouTube channel Charisma on Command explains how to give yourself that certain gravitas, stage presence, respect. Now, not all of it is teachable. I mean, you can't learn to be 7 feet tall, for instance. And in this respect, yeah, some people are born lucky. But so what? We don't exist in a deterministic universe where one's natural talents guarantee success. One could argue that natural talent makes one complacent, while the underdog is determined to close the gap through sheer skill and hard work, like the tortoise and the hare.
Even if you don't become a CEO of a company, even if you don't find yourself climbing up the ladder of hierarchy in whatever business you work for, all of those traits will still ensure that you are reasonably successful. Maybe not successful in everything you want to do, but successful nonetheless. You'll be able to live a reasonably comfortable life, take care of those you love, etc. We live in a fallen telestial world, so there's really no way in hell you should expect anything more.
We don't live in a deterministic universe. The material circumstances of our environment are not destiny. We have free will.
What do they have in common? I've discovered 5 characteristics of highly successful people under capitalism. And if you follow my foolproof 5-step system that I call the slime method, I guarantee you'll be successful beyond your wildest dreams.
Note the ridiculous straw man of success he sets up. Aside from everything I've said previously, I want you to take special note of how he views success in a purely materialistic light. He doesn't define success in other ways, like what kinds of things your children remember you for when you're dead, how many people you helped in whatever way, how many times you were kind to the unpopular kids at school, the people you've inspired, the lives you have touched, or lack thereof.
I haven't actually seen this far ahead in the video yet, but I suspect this slime method is going to be a caricature of entrepreneurs as Machiavellian sociopaths with chronic backstabbing syndrome. Am I off the mark here?
Successful people believe that they can succeed. If you didn't believe that, why would you even try? In order to succeed, you have to believe that you can succeed. Don't just sit around whining about the unfairness of the world. Get out there and bust your butt.
You'd be surprised how much of success is about mindset. Simply visualizing achieving your goals in your mind makes you want it, which gives you the motivation to do the hard work in the first place. So yes, continue.
Try to ignore the startling amount of people who die within the same social class as their parents.
And it was all sarcasm. This is why Marxists don't believe people can succeed. In their minds, they've already made it impossible.
Are we talking about people who struggle for their entire lives to make ends meet, or people who simply make the same amount of money their parents do, or make less than their parents? Why is that a bad thing? Social mobility means that you have the freedom to fail, or to make less than your parents.
With a whole lot of stuff, man. I mean, first of all, when you step up in competition, it's hard to look that dominant. Usually when people step up in competition, you know, it's a closed tooth and nail type of affair. But that's what I really like about the Charlos. They step up in competition, and 9 times out of 10, you know, they win in a dominant performance. And that's the difference from a Canelo and a Gennady Golovkin, which I know that's going to piss off a whole bunch of Canelo and Golovkin fans. But the truth is the truth. When they step up like that, they struggling, it's controversial, and all of that stuff. But when like you got Jamel Charlo, he just beat someone who just knocked out Julian Williams, who his other brother knocked out Julian J. Rock Williams when he was undefeated. Now the younger brother is knocking out the dude who beat him to unify the belts. They do it in impressive fashion, man. And for him to knock him out with a jab to the solar plexus, yeah, man, that was extremely impressive, man.
Right. And one thing about the Charlo brothers, one thing they have in common is that they both got avoided by Canelo. At 154, I don't know if you recall this, Canelo was supposed to fight Jamel in Texas instead of Crooklyn, because obviously that was Jamel's hometown, and Canelo, he have a lot of fan base when it comes to the Hispanic community.
When you say he was supposed to, you mean that's what he was supposed to do, not because I don't want it to be mistaken for they were talking about doing it. Like Canelo was actually trying to make that fight, right?
Oh no, Canelo wasn't trying to make that fight.
I wanted to make that clear. Yeah.
The only reason I said that is because at the time Jamel was signed with Golden Boy, and Golden Boy promised Jamel if he wins his next fight, he's gonna get a Canelo opportunity instead of Crooklyn. Yeah, instead of Crooklyn. So because Golden Boy didn't fulfill their promises, Jamel ended up actually leaving Golden Boy. The fact that Canelo didn't fight Jamel Charlo at the time, it caused Golden Boy to lose Jamel, because Jamel told Golden Boy, let me out of my contract if you guys not gonna keep y'all promise. This is a big fight. I'm from Texas, and he have a lot of fans from Texas, so it only makes sense for them to fight, right? So that's why he left Golden Boy. And also, we already know Big Charlo, his situation at 160, Canelo Alvarez requested a French fries belt in order to avoid that fight. So they do have that in common. Canelo avoided both of them, and he's still avoiding the Big Charlo to this day. So my question to you is, now the pressure, is it rising when it comes to Canelo? Does he now have to face Jamal Charlo? Will he face Jamal Charlo?
The pressure is definitely rising. You know, the walls are closing in for a couple different reasons. Like I just said in the video I just dropped, I think it would be wise, even though it's a gamble, but it would be wise for Jamal to either go after, if he can't get Canelo right now, either unify and go after Andre, or hop up to 168, because he already said he wanted that fight, and fight the baddest man at 168, which is David Benavidez. If he were to beat either one of those guys, that would put tremendous pressure on Canelo to take that fight. Now, another reason why it's already pressure on Canelo is because even DAZN is going to start putting pressure on Canelo to take that fight. Like I just said in the video I reported a couple days ago, apparently Canelo is in mediations right now with DAZN, which means they're negotiating some type of settlement that they'll both be cool with. And in that situation, the DAZN, surprisingly, they want to now give Canelo $20 million a fight instead of $35 million, and then they're gonna give him a percentage of the DAZN buys, basically, like pay-per-view buys. So when it comes to new subscribers, so what that implies is DAZN is basically telling Canelo, if you want to make more money, first of all, we made a mistake giving you the money we gave you, because we thought you was going to be bringing in some ridiculous numbers like Floyd Mayweather, and that didn't happen. So now you're going to have to show and prove if you want something even close to 35 million, or even close to 30 million, because he probably still ain't going to even get 30 million now. So that's where more pressure comes in. Now, whoever he's working with is going to be forcing him. And even if he leaves the zone and he wants to make serious money, yeah, he's going to have to get in there with somebody like Jamal. So for now, though, all Jamal has to do is keep winning. The fact that Jamal keeps winning and he looks more and more impressive, that is another thing that continues to put pressure on Canelo Alvarez.
Speaking of, to all of the fans, check out the video Dante dropped on DAZN. When it comes to Canelo Alvarez, it was a great video. Dante dropped a lot of jewels, so I'll leave it in the comment section below after the live is over. And to follow up with that, you're 100% correct on that, because remember, the reason why HBO went out of business is because they didn't have that type of revenue coming in, like when Floyd Mayweather was still fighting, when Manny Pacquiao was still fighting. So if Canelo couldn't save HBO, even though he fought Gennady Golovkin the first time on HBO, and they promoted that fight like it was one of the biggest fights of all time, right? So they put that narrative out there. So if Canelo was such a star, he would have saved HBO. One thing for sure that we do know, if Floyd Mayweather, let's say Floyd Mayweather was 29 years old after he beat Oscar and he's fighting on HBO, HBO would not have left the boxing game, right? But it shows you that Canelo don't have that type of a star power due to the fact that he's not fighting the guys he's supposed to fight, like the Jamal Charlos of the world, which is leaving a bad taste in a lot of people's mouth. So DAZN definitely made a huge miscalculation, because if he was gonna bring DAZN to life, he would have saved HBO. So them giving him $32 million guarantee to fight, that was a huge miscalculation on their behalf. So we'll see what happens with that. Now, when it's Canelo, they always say, "Oh, who have he fought? Who have he beat?" But when Jamel, like you pointed out, like when Jamel is fighting Rosario, he never said, "Oh, who did Rosario beat? Oh, you got to earn a shot with me." He went on and fought him. You know what I'm saying? And put on a hell of a performance. In order to be great, you got to challenge yourself against the best. And in the sport of boxing, the best must fight the best. So this is one step forward in the sport of boxing. So hopefully they continue doing that. Any closing thoughts on, both of the Charlo brothers and their pound for pound status, and just your take overall?
Parents. It's quite possible that my income will never reach the same level as my parents. And I'm okay with that, because unlike you, I'm not a covetous piece of shit who wants to murder people because they have more than I do.
Take, for example, this study from the Brookings Institute. Reading this with a success mentality means focusing on the fact that real income growth makes the current generation better off than the previous one.
Especially in ways that's difficult to measure in dollar amounts, like how you can get certain items for lower prices, like food, over-the-counter medicines, cars, high-resolution TVs, gaming computers, tablets, etc. You can just forget about all that. That isn't convenient to your narrative.
Median family income for adults who were children in the late 1960s and are now in their 30s or 40s increased 29%, from $55,000 for parents to nearly $72,000 for their children, adjusting for inflation. See? Nothing's holding you back from growth. Your whole generation is on an upward trajectory. That means there's no excuse for you. Get out there and make that money.
Even if you don't end up making more than your parents, you still don't have a good reason to sit on your ass and whine about how life isn't fair.
Well, it isn't fair. It's as far from fine as you can get for reasons I've covered in previous videos. Minimum wage, putting price floors on employment, therefore creating job shortages. Licensing and agency shops, making entrepreneurship and employment illegal without state or union approval, respectively. Economic restrictions and taxation that reduce real wages by making goods and services more expensive. What do all of these have in common? I feel like I'm missing something, like one very large monopolistic institution that is responsible for literally all of it.
And the funny thing is, you can't even wash your hands clean from any of that, because you yourself have openly supported government programs like PBS, and you've also made excuses for bootlickers like the teenagers from Parkland. You can't even claim to be anti-state. Despite you claiming to be an ANCOM, you openly admit to liking the state as long as it gives you free shit.
It's frustrating. Boomers telling us that we just have to work harder when they grew up at a time when a summer job paid for their house and you could get a job on your way home from having been fired from the previous job. In this respect, I sympathize because I've been there. But we need to be honest about the actual causes, namely the state. Since Marxism necessarily requires central banking, taxation, government dominion of communication and transportation, literal central planning of the economy, government schooling, and more. Hold on a second. These things already exist and are parts of the problem. Marxism advocates for the causes of the very problem Slimeball is whining about. If he has his way, everything will just be made worse.
A failure mentality means focusing on the part of the study which reads, 42% of children born to parents in the bottom fifth of the income distribution remain in the bottom, while 39% born to the parents in the top fifth remain at the top. The rags to riches story is much more common in Hollywood than on Main Street. Only 6% of children born to parents with family income at the very bottom move to the very top.
According to his own study, a lower percentage of people remain in the top than those who cannot move from the bottom. That 42%? That's still a lot of room for people to increase their incomes even a little bit, not even taking into account increases in the standard of living due to technological advancement making life cheaper and easier. All this in spite of government taxation and economic restrictions directly advocated for by statists, making essentials like food and housing vastly more expensive. We're already well aware of the fact that the rags to riches story is actually pretty rare, but to bring that up is a straw man of the whole concept of social mobility to begin with. We already know that 70% of wealthy families lose their fortunes by the second generation and 90% by the third. As the saying goes, shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves. So even in our quasi-fascist, mercantilist economy that vaguely resembles a market economy, we still have 58% of people who escape from the lowest income bracket and those at the top who plummet. Don't get me wrong, the current system is unjust. Nobody is defending our current levels of economic mobility as preferable, but our reasoning is based on an objective understanding of universal ethics from natural law. Yours is just based on your own psychological flaws and will ultimately result in causing the current problems to be magnified 100-fold.
Now maybe you hear those odds and think, geez, that sounds unfair. It sounds like the system is rigged against me. It sounds like social class is a self-perpetuating and unfair economic hierarchy designed to concentrate and maintain the authority of a select few over the rest of us. But that's a self-limiting belief, holding you back. In fact, anything that contradicts the narrative that you can and will succeed, no matter how unfair or prejudicial the circumstances you were born into, is just a self-limiting belief.
It's both a self-limiting belief and it's also a self-fulfilling prophecy. You set the definition of success to be unrealistically high in order to set up a straw man so high that it's something that most people, myself included, don't even aspire to.
I define success as financial independence. Slimeball might define it as being a billionaire, and that's fine. Value is subjective, so what he defines it as, well, that's up to him.
Your own source even mentions that you have a 50 to 60% chance of either making the same amount of money your parents do, or making more than your parents. Even if you don't, there's the fact that technology is constantly improving, ensuring that you can live a reasonably comfortable life with less and less money. Let's put it this way, would you rather be the richest man from the 18th century, or would you rather be a working class or middle class person from the 21st century? I would pick the latter in a heartbeat. You may not have as much money as the richest people from the 18th century, but in a way, you are most certainly wealthier than they are. Count your blessings and stop whining about how life is so unfair.
He's trying to use satire to communicate the absurdity of success in a capitalist economy. Problem is, satire is supposed to be funny. Also, please define capitalism.
Any recognition of the difficulties you face is merely a failure on your part to comprehend your ability to transcend them.
Nobody says that at all.
You need to have an abundance mentality, not a scarcity mentality. People with an abundance mentality believe that there's enough for everyone and don't begrudge other people for what they have. People with a scarcity mentality believe that other people's success limits their own.
What are you talking about, Slimy? It's you commies that have starved countless millions to death. It's you commies that constantly talk about how communism will supposedly be a post-scarcity society. Saul Alinsky once said that the price of a successful attack is a constructive alternative, and the sooner you are willing to actually follow this rule, the sooner I will actually take you seriously.
At least he admits his Malthusian economics, that there is a static amount of wealth in the world, and that someone else's success must come at the expense of someone else. You can tell he's saying this as he's sarcastically referring to his actual ideas as a scarcity mentality. Like all totalitarianists, Slimeball can't conceive of private industry's capacity to utilize resources more efficiently or create whole new resources.
For example, they might get bitter when they find out something like that the top 1% of people own 45% of the wealth on Earth.
Why should I feel resentment? As long as they earned that money legitimately through voluntary exchange, it doesn't matter if 10 people owned 99% of the wealth. They didn't do anything unethical. Their success didn't harm me. In fact, it probably benefited me, because they sold me a good or service that enriched my life. If you wanted to make the argument that wealth inequality is exaggerated unjustly because of corporatism, then I would agree with you. But the existence of wealth inequality is not itself unjust. If you want to make that claim, then the burden of proof is on you to explain why. Simply having wealth is passive. For someone to have done something wrong, they must have engaged in an action that was unjustified. For example, taxation. So please prove your point.
The top 1% also shares over half of the tax burden, at least in the United States. Hell, increases in taxes on the rich is one of the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto. So will you stop whining now?
And 64% of the human beings on that very same planet own less than 2% of the wealth.
How many of those people live in communist hellholes or other such countries that rank low on the index of economic freedom? How exactly will implementing socialism in our own country feed people on the other side of the world?
It won't. In fact, it'll drag more people into poverty. If some people can't have something, no one can, I guess.
People with scarcity mentalities whine about how while successful people get more successful, people on the bottom are going into crippling debt.
Well, I've already mentioned how the quality of life for all parties, rich and poor, is steadily getting better, even in third world countries. As for crippling debt, whose fault is that? Their own? Because even according to your own source, vast amounts of money tend to get spent on non-essentials? Or how winners of the lottery end up just as poor as before, if not more so than before, which strongly implies that they just suck with money and have no idea what to do when they obtain vast amounts of it? And even in the numerous cases when it's not their fault, you have the government monopolizing education and reducing the quality of it and spreading the lie that one absolutely needs a college education in order to get a respectable job, thus ensuring that one has to go into debt in order to receive any actual training in order to go into the field they want to go into. Or when government regulation and socialism has either drastically increased the cost of healthcare or created artificial shortages in healthcare, or even both at the same time, or when the state seems to be hell-bent at increasing the cost of housing, cracking down on anyone who tries to produce homes at a lower price, even tiny homes that, while they're not much to look at, would at least ensure that more people can live reasonably comfortable lives.
He isn't addressing the real problem. The injustices Marx identified were either directly caused by the state or transient points of economic development we have since innovated out of existence. Most of the problems modern Marxists identify are transient points of economic development we will innovate out of existence. For example, the state, and the extent to which it artificially makes living more expensive. We don't need this parasite. The only reason Slimeball hasn't put forward any alternatives to the current system is to avoid us being able to criticize it, giving him a way to weasel out of critique with plausible deniability. We all know it will bring forward a tyrannical authoritarian dictatorship even more repressive than the late-stage democracy we currently suffer under. So how do I know that his ideas will bring forward a tyrannical authoritarian dictatorship if he hasn't said anything of the sort in this video yet? Well, he's a Marxist. I mean, come on.
Now, you could work for a living like a peasant, but that isn't successful. In order to be truly successful, you have to have absurd fuck-off cash, which you're not going to get by being a cog in a machine. You gotta own the machine, or something which produces goods and services.
Kinda like these things? Or anything owned by this guy? Or my personal favorite, this? Virtually anything you can get your hands on can be used as a means of production with enough creativity. It sure as hell won't guarantee success, but to believe that it would is to uncritically swallow the labor theory of value.
Considering prostitutes, both male and female, use their sexual organs as a means of production, does that mean communists must seize penis?
That way, you don't have to produce anything. You can pay other people to produce for you. I know, sounds expensive, right?
You have no idea if they actually are or not. If there is any division of labor at all, you'll just cry that it's unjust for some odd reason.
To succeed in business, all you have to do is pay your workers less than the value they produce for you. This practice is called exploitation, and it's your golden ticket to Richville, baby.
What is it going to take to get it through your thick skulls that it's unjust to falsely accuse your employer of robbing you because of something that is completely subjective, like the value of labor? Suppose I was making a documentary video where I interview random people on the streets without paying them. Or suppose I found a voice actress on a site like Casting Call Club to help me with a flash animation, and I pay her the amount of money she has up on her commission sheet, without paying her any royalties from whatever revenue I get from the animation. According to the labor theory of value, I would be exploiting people in both instances, even though in reality, the interviewee doesn't expect any monetary compensation, and thus doesn't ask for it, and neither does the voice actress ask for any royalties in order for me to use her voice, unless she believes that I would be able to pay it.
You'd be surprised what poor and desperate people are willing to do for shitty subsistence wages when the alternative is starving to death.
And how often does this happen in countries that have attempted communism or socialism to some degree?
Now, some workers might have a failure mentality and might start to complain. They might even try to work together to collectively bargain for better pay, safer conditions, or more control over their work.
Workers want to get paid as much as possible, while employers want to pay as little as possible. While modern unions in the US are corrupt as hell, the concept of workers getting together to persuade their employers to pay them more is fantastic. This little back and forth is how both parties come to a mutually beneficial agreement. As long as all participants voluntarily consent, it's a good thing.
Don't panic. You have options. You can fire everyone and replace them with scabs at an even cheaper price. You can have a huge propaganda campaign with misleading statistics to make unionizing seem like a bad deal for your employees, even though it isn't.
In many states, it's illegal to work if you're not part of a labor union in certain industries. How much $700 a year is worth to you is entirely up to you, but personally, I'd rather negotiate my own salary.
Buying a new video game system actually sounds like an even better deal than funding a corrupt labor cartel that doesn't give a damn about me as an individual.
And that's your prerogative.
You can relocate your company to a country with less strict labor laws. Maybe hire some kids.
So, in response to all of your unreasonable demands and government regulation, businesses will outsource to people who have less of an entitlement mentality than you do, and even pay them a tad more than what they're used to getting? Imagine my shock.
How expensive does domestic production have to get before companies figure that complying with foreign economic legislation and restrictions, dealing with international trade restrictions, shipping materials and goods across thousands of miles of ocean, as well as transporting to the store from port hundreds of miles, is less expensive than just producing it in their own backyard? It isn't cheaper at all. Outsourcing is a symptom of the fact that domestic production has become so expensive because of government restrictions that this ridiculous idea of outsourcing is more profitable by comparison. If we cut down the cost of domestic production, it can go away. The simplest way to do that, get rid of the government and let people voluntarily associate.
You can work with prison companies to hire literal slaves. Hell, Own the prisons too. That's vertical integration, baby.
If there was any doubt whatsoever, that Slimeball has no intention of eliminating, or hell, even doing a half-assed cutting of the state, dispel that illusion now. So are we done yet? Marxism is so boring, and if I have to listen to any more of this crap, I might fall asleep.
Not yet, but we can take a break now. Let's finish this later.
Okay, cool. Hey, wait, are you gonna untie me? You'll be back soon, right? Hello? Hello? Waffle House? Beto is a common nickname among Hispanics for people whose names end in Berto. For example, Roberto. But his name isn't Roberto, it's Robert. He uses Beto to increase his standing on the progressive stack, manipulating people into thinking he's a minority so he gets their votes and he can represent them. We haven't even started yet, and he's already a lying sack of crap. Spoiler alert, he isn't a minority.
Unrestrained money and influence have warped this country's priorities in its very democracy. It has invited cynicism, distrust, and disengagement from Americans who see a government enthralled to those who can pay for access and outcomes.
Vote buying, both from the government to citizens and citizens to the government, is a characteristic of late-stage democracies, and people should distrust the government.
A vigorous democracy, both economic and political, is the only check on the inertia of power, on the corruption and capture of our institutions, and the only means to elevate the voices and lives of our fellow citizens.
All states incentivize a capture of the institutions. The voices and lives of our fellow citizens you seek to elevate are simply trying to capture the institutions for themselves, as are you. The inertia of power is not a glitch, it's a feature.
But when the safeguards of our democracy are manipulated by those in power, when members of Congress choose their own voters, when the Supreme Court says that corporations are people and money is speech, when special interests and PACs can purchase elections and legislation, when voting rights are withdrawn, then we seek becoming a democracy in name only. Where the idea that this country holds that we are all born equal to equal opportunity is justifiably seen as a lie by those who experience gross differences in justice, in education, in health, in economic advancement.
Your first point on campaign finance was how powerful people use fear and division to get power. Now here you are, son of a district judge, playing on fear that the super scary special interests and PACs to try to become president. You hypocrite.
These challenges and the threats to our democracy cannot be met by half measures or with only half the country. It's gonna take all we've got, and it's gonna take all of us.
And we all know he means none of it.
The difference between us, where we live, who we love, to whom we pray, how long our families have been in this country, the color of our skin, the party to which we belong, those differences cannot be allowed to define us or divide us now. Therefore, before we are anything else, let us be Americans first, and together do the work of this country.
How about you get out of the way and let us associate voluntarily? That should be an issue we can all unite on. We are individuals first. Let us associate voluntarily and figure out this crap for ourselves. That's an issue we should all be able to unite on.
So if we believe in universal, guaranteed, high-quality healthcare, because we see the consequences of our fellow Americans who go without, then let us come together around a policy that prioritizes affordability of prescription drugs, lowers the cost of premiums, and ensures that in a country where one of the largest providers of healthcare services is our county jail system, a country where we have a maternal mortality crisis that is 3 times as deadly for women of color, that universal healthcare means everyone gets mental healthcare.
Now, universal healthcare doesn't necessarily mean single-payer healthcare. His consistent pattern of seeking government authoritarianism as a solution for everything does strongly suggest his desire for government being the sole determining actor in whether individuals live or die. If it really was his goal to make healthcare cheaper, he would be advocating for abolishing copyright laws and patents, getting rid of the FDA. But the fact that he's not indicates that he's either ignorant or disingenuous. Pick one. Either way, a government that has control over your healthcare controls your life.
And universal also means every woman makes her own decisions about her own body.
Has he said anything about getting government funding out of Planned Parenthood? I'm not in favor of a government ban on abortion either, don't get me wrong. But why should I be forced to subsidize murder, you son of a bitch?
We can give every American and every business the choice to enroll in Medicare without eliminating plans that many Americans like for their families because they work for their families. This means every one of us is able to afford our prescriptions, see a doctor, take our children to a therapist. No one priced out, no one denied care, no one left behind. The goal of universal, guaranteed, high-quality healthcare must be achieved as quickly and as surely as possible.
If you like your doctor, you will be able to keep your doctor, period. If you like your health care plan, you will be able to keep your health care plan, period.
If we believe in an economy that works for all, then let us invest in a world-class pre-K through 12 education system and ensure that we are paying our educators a living wage so that they don't have to work a second or third job.
The US pays more than almost any other country on education per student, and our results are still substandard. You can't just throw money at the problems inherent in the Prussian system of education and call it fixed. Hell, most of these flaws are actually features, there, by design. The Prussian system was deliberately created to create unthinking, obedient slaves without any critical thinking ability whatsoever.
Let's graduate young women and men from high school who are career ready as well as college ready, able to pursue debt-free higher education or a job that provides purpose and a real paycheck.
I wonder why he said women first. He's not gender baiting, is he? He just loves womans. Do you like womans? Love them harder. Love them! Get the government out of education already. This isn't complicated.
Let's strengthen unions and ensure a path to apprenticeships and careers.
In states that don't have right-to-work laws, you have to join a union as a condition of employment. It is literally illegal to work in those jobs without their precious little stamp of approval, which usually comes with the price tag of yet another percentage of your income taken for corrupt bureaucrats on top of government taxation. Unions are dying, and good riddance. What the hell are you thinking? Strengthening unions.
Guarantee that one job is enough by paying every working American a true living wage.
You can guarantee that one job is enough for every working American by getting the government to go away. You authoritarians are an impediment to prosperity, not its facilitator. And all increasing the minimum wage is going to do is make jobs more scarce. Otherwise, you would just increase the minimum wage to $1 million an hour.
Let's partner with rural communities on infrastructure, schools, hospitals, and broadband internet.
Translation: give the corporations that donate to my campaign special contracts to build infrastructure. This is vote buying, plain and simple.
Let's make sure farmers can make a profit while they grow the food and fiber that feeds and clothes not just this country, but so much of the world.
It's not the state's role to ensure farmers make a profit. That's called corporatism.
Let's give them access to technologies and markets that make solving climate change a source of new income.
Corporatism!
Let's ensure everyone can succeed regardless of their family dynamics, their gender, their sexual orientation, or their race. Paid family leave, equal pay for women, no discrimination in the workplace, and access to capital for communities that have been effectively shut out of capital, home loans, and wealth for generations.
Paid family leave isn't up to you. Equal pay for women has been so thoroughly debunked, it's not even worth getting into anymore. Plus, it's already illegal. So is workplace discrimination. As for access to capital, this is literally already a law called the Community Reinvestment Act, which is responsible for the 2008 financial crash. You asshole.
If we believe in real criminal justice reform, in the face of the largest prison population in the face of the planet, one disproportionately comprised of people of color, let us not just end the prohibition of marijuana, or the expungement of the records of those arrested solely for the possession of a substance legal in most of this country. Let's go beyond ending cash bail, prisons for profit, and the war on drugs.
There is so much right here, I don't even know where to begin.
And confront the true legacy of slavery, of segregation and suppression, of how people have been criminalized and kept down based on their race and ethnicity. Only the truth will allow us to repair the damage done and keep us from repeating the same injustices.
Absolute race baiting, attempting to provoke guilt or demand reparations for crimes nobody alive is a victim of or a perpetrator of. Way to make yourself the white savior here, Robert.
If we believe that this country's success is premised on the fact that immigrants and asylum seekers from the world over have found a home here, then let us forever free dreamers from any fear of deportation by making them U.S. citizens. Let's bring millions more of our fellow Americans out of the shadows and onto a path to contribute even more to our country's success.
How about we get the government out of controlling borders entirely and realize that citizenship is an arbitrary distinction between people? Well, I mean, this is a good first step.
let's not only honor our asylum laws and never again take another child from another parent at their most desperate and vulnerable moment, but guarantee that all separated families are reunited. Let's acknowledge that every man, every woman, every child in detention, including those behind fences and barbed wire under our international bridges connecting us with Mexico, are our fellow human beings and deserve to be treated like human beings.
I mean, I agree, but one doesn't need to use race baiting to make a point, as you've been doing a lot here, or invoking long debunked nonsense about families being separated. If we want to avoid this completely, get the government out of border enforcement.
Let's ensure our security not through walls and militarization, but by investing in our ports of entry, where the vast majority of everything and everyone that ever comes into this country first enters. Supporting the women and men of the CBP and treating one another, regardless of our status or how many generations or days we've been in this country, with dignity and respect.
What does this even mean?
And if we're serious about security, let this country of immigrants, Republicans, Independents, and Democrats rewrite our immigration laws in our own image, from our own experiences, and in the best traditions of this great country.
What does that even mean?
If we are truly grateful for the veterans that have fought this country's wars, who came back from Vietnam to a country that did not understand or thank them for their service, who are coming back from wars that are 27 years long in Iraq, 17 in Afghanistan, let us not only ensure that we meet every single part of our obligation to them, their PTSD treated, a roof over the head of every homeless vet, an investment in the treatments and conditions unique to combat and service, let us also make sure that before we enter yet another war, that we have exhausted every single peaceful alternative, and that we end the wars that have no definition of victory or strategy to win them, and bring these service members back home to their families and their communities.
He says this now, but when he gets into office and realizes that US being the world police force is the only thing keeping the US economy and the US dollar afloat, well, expect him to change his tone real quick and make State of the Union addresses about how we need to bring democracy to the next country trying to undermine the petrodollar. It's good he wants to avoid pointless wars, but he's also talking about spending other people's stolen money.
If we understand that climate change is real, it is caused by our own excess and inaction, that the floods, fires, and droughts that we are currently experiencing are only going to get much worse if this planet warms another 1 degree Celsius, then let us organize this country around a historic effort to free this economy from a dependence on greenhouse gas emissions, invest in the technologies and jobs in renewable energy that will speed this transition, and reassert our international leadership before it's too late.
You ain't seen nothing yet. Hit it!
Start cutting pollution on day one, and taking executive actions to lead on climate.
Basically amounts to a big government spending program on cutting down the United States economy's production and its ability to produce. This is going to make life much harder and much more unaffordable for you, me, and everyone.
Mobilize $5 trillion for climate change with investment in infrastructure, innovation, and our people and communities.
The United States is $22 trillion in debt already. You're using money stolen from people to pay for things that will necessarily make life more difficult to live. This is cut straight out of the Green New Deal.
Guarantee our net zero emissions ambition by 2050.
If there's any question as to whether or not Robert wants to make the US a planned command economy, this is it.
Defend our communities that are preparing for and fighting against extreme weather.
This problem always seems to be urgent, doesn't it? That if we don't do something now, bad weather will happen. This isn't much different than when advertisers tell you that the sales are only for a limited time, so call right now. The difference is that you can voluntarily disassociate from companies that are trying to sell stuff to you. This urgency is meant to override your critical thinking with a sense of panic. Oh, if we don't stop global cooling right now, then that's tantamount to denying that it's happening, which is something that Robert unironically stated. But every solution presented, without exception, well, it's the same with all stated solutions. The problem is always that we have too much liberty, too much autonomy in our economic decision making, and the solution presented is the need for central planners to nudge us into doing their bidding through incentives, shove us through increased bureaucracy, legislation, and economic restrictions, and then shoot us if we resist. After all, that's all legislation is. Opinions with guns. No problem exists in the world that is so dire that we must restrict the agency of the individual. That's called tyranny. Back to the main site.
much as we met the existential threat to the Western democracies of Nazi Germany nearly 80 years ago, and at the same time helped to lift millions of Americans into the middle class, we have an opportunity to meet the existential threat to this planet by ensuring that public health policy, economic policy, and the engine of a far more conscientious capitalism is put to work in service of our ability to meet this challenge.
You gotta love how the implicit assumption is that the prosperity of post-war America in the late 40s and 50s is credited to World War II. I've already debunked war Keynesianism, how it's just the broken window fallacy on a continental scale, so I don't need to get into it. But again, you see the echoings of the Green New Deal. How Robert wants the US to have a planned economy